All right, thank you. So tonight I will be introducing you all to this idea of fluid design in CSS when you're designing your websites or web applications. And in order to talk about fluid design, we're going to talk a little bit about music and sound. Um, so what is fluid design? Uh, It's a simple technique for implementing truly responsive web applications. And what do I mean by truly responsive? Um, we will get into that shortly. This idea was popularized by Tim Brown, head of typography at Adobe, um, in his talk, More Perfect Typography, in 2010, where he walks through step by step this process of what he calls type first approach to designing your web pages, which is how you can start from this idea in your head, and then you pick a typeface, and then the next step is to pick like a base body font size, like the font in your paragraphs, the main body text. That's where you start with your design. That size, that typeface that you picked out, that font you picked out that looks nice, you find that like sweet spot where it looks good. Normally around 16 pixels is standard. And then from there, that's going to be kind of like your base unit, right? He believes in this idea that everything on a web page is just, it's either type or it's space, right? Everything on a web page is type or space. So we start with type, and we multiply that number by like a ratio, like, and you keep doing this to create kind of like steps in a scale. But before we jump more into that, let's talk about like how people approach responsive design. Right now, we create many different versions of our design for every breakpoint, which represent different like viewport widths. Like this might be like a mobile view for your web page. This might be like on a tablet. There's some other more like, you might have like 5 or 6, who knows, you can have as many. It's arbitrary, they're made up. Like there's no good set number for these breakpoints, and it's all kind of dependent on your design. And then you have these columns, right? We use grids to define like how many columns wide elements will be as those breakpoint changes. So this is like, it goes from 2 columns to 4 columns, and you do this for every element on your web page. It takes a long time, and you have to think about all these different versions, and you kind of have to juggle them in your head. It's not super easy. So what if instead of designing like 4 to 6 versions of your layout, you design 2 of them? You design the smallest one, and you design what you would like it to look like at the largest size, and then you let your computer interpolate everything in between. And there's a very nice like CSS trick for accomplishing this and letting your computer or your browser do all that work for you. The first step is creating that palette of fluid measurements, what I was trying to describe earlier, where you start with your font size and you keep multiplying or dividing it to create kind of like steps of values that look like they just go together, right? And then you clamp those values, those fluid values, to the smallest screen size you would like to design for, and then the largest screen size you would like to design for. You clamp them to the edges of the window. And the browser does the work for you. It will kind of make your website look like it was seamlessly and smoothly just kind of becoming smaller in like unison, rather than these jarring transitions from like a mobile view to like a desktop view or whatever. And the best part is you just need 6 simple ingredients. That base font size, in this example, they're using 17 pixels. You need a minimum viewport size to design for, a maximum viewport size to design for. You can think about like this is like the mobile dimensions here. These are the desktop dimensions. You just pick them. And so the base font size is going to be 16 pixels in mobile, 20 pixels in your desktop, And then like the third ingredient here is kind of like what makes it magical. It's the type scale multiplier. And we are going to talk about what this is. This is a ratio. This is the ratio that you multiply or divide from that base number. And it's going to be smaller at smaller viewport widths and larger at larger viewport widths, because you tend to want things to separate more fastly at larger screen sizes. So here's another quote. A modular scale, like a musical scale, is a prearranged set of harmonious proportions. When I first read this, I had no idea what that meant. And I think the easiest way to understand it is, yes, to talk about music and sound. This analogy comes up a lot in all the different blog posts I encountered. But when you strike an object, it makes a sound, which, it starts to vibrate and it affects the air around it. And the compressions and rarefactions in the air form a wave-like shape, right, that we perceive as pitch and frequency, This is like maybe like a top-down view of like compressions and more like spaced out air particles, but that is what the sound you are hearing is. The sound you are hearing is not, necessarily like this like green worm that flies into your ear. It kind of spreads like a ripple in 3 dimensions from the source of like the strike. And it's not just one sound, it's actually many different sounds. This here, like I think the best way to explain this is to think about like when you plug a guitar string, this is how it vibrates. You have like this fundamental tone that is the note that you perceive, but there are all these like harmonic overtones that contribute to the timbre of the sound that you are hearing. So our brain kind of interprets this as one kind of like tone color, but it's actually a lot of like multiple different component frequencies. And the relative strength or lack of these harmonic component frequencies is what makes a sound musical, as opposed to just like a noise, like a bang, like dropping something random, right? It's these regular harmonic intervals. Here, I just have some diagrams to drive this point home. Your piano keyboard is a modular scale. In every octave of your piano keyboard, every note on a keyboard is like 1.059% more, like greater in frequency than the note before it, like each semitone on your piano keyboard. And so this is like a modular scale. And what we're going to be doing for the web is creating a modular scale using kind of just borrowing these principles from music to create just some building blocks to build from. So yeah, so again, here's just an example I pulled from Tim Brown's talk, where he's using the golden ratio here. He has his 16 pixel font size, and he multiplies it by the golden ratio and divides it by the golden ratio to create a modular scale, which is just a bunch of numbers that are logically related to one another. On a lot of these websites we'll be looking at, they'll be talking about intervals, but this is just, like on a piano, the different notes have different intervals. The same intervals are used when creating a modular scale for web design. I think this is a little more like, I do think the analogy falls apart after a while. There is some talk about like pleasant or nice to look at ratios in nature or art. The golden ratio, I think, is probably the most famous example. There's something, about it. You see pictures like this a lot, just how it's just maybe inherently pleasing to behold, especially in like branding. You see images like this floating around the internet of how like they use the golden ratio to create these beautiful like logos and things. But this is the golden ratio. You can think about these as like blocks that represent the different components you can use. I'd like you to think about this as kind of like a set of golden Legos that no matter how you arrange them, they just kind of feel right. We did talk about some limitations. I came across, just as an aside, some opinions online, and I kind of agree that, like, at the end of the day, it does depend really on what you like and what you think looks good, because Um, often what is most mathematically perfect is not the most interesting thing at all, at all. So I mean, this idea of like more perfect typography, take that with a grain of salt. He's talking about how like these mathematical frameworks, whether you're using them in music or typography, are really just starting points on which to riff, knowing when and how to deploy them as a matter of taste. So it's really, take it with a grain of salt. And yeah, sometimes the point is to be weird or break the rules, and often that's much more interesting than not doing that. I picked this image on purpose because this is like kind of the rule of thirds, another way we talk about harmonious ratios and visual design. It's like this, you might see this on like your camera. It's this idea of lining everything up on these thirds. And even though this is like a mathematically perfect picture, it's actually, quite inane and not very interesting, or, I mean, it's all right. I also found this funny like picture on the web. I found this picture on the web. So here we go. Like, so is this? Are we making more perfect, more harmonious like facial features? I feel like this really drives the point home to me. Like, this might be more symmetrical. It might be more golden ratio. It kind of looks a bit like a Magritte or something, maybe a Picasso. Maybe we are. I don't know. So I found a lot of kind of silly examples. I went down this rabbit hole. I thought I'd just click through these. You can you can put this on anything. Like, yeah, you can put it on whatever you want. I think we should think about that. Yeah, this myth of mathematical perfection. Like students, we learn the structure and then we have to let it go. And so there's this sort of bell curve of benefit that we derive from focusing too much on, making it mathematically systematic or whatever. So the first time I gave a baby version of this talk was at one of the Upwise Lightning Talk meetups, and Jen invited me to kind of apply these principles to their website. I'm going to show you kind of just a before and after. And then I'll show you some code. So again, at the end of the day, it's going to be a little, subjective. I mean, whether you like one design more than the other is really going to be up to you. But I hope you can perceive that these values seem to just match for whatever, because they are logically related, and that's also how we perceive sounds. So how this works is, and I'll drop some links for you. I think the most important one that I'll drop is going to be this Utopia website, where they are going to create these calculations for you. They're going to write the CSS for you. You enter those 6 values we talked about. You start with the type. You start with the type scale, right? We're just going to use these default values, but you can see they have like the intervals written out as like different intervals in music. I think that's just kind of like flavor text, and then what you're left with is a series of steps, kind of like steps on a piano, where these are values that go together. There's going to be some CSS here at the bottom. You drop this into this is your modular scale. This is almost like your musical scale. This is your piano keyboard, and you could keep adding steps or removing steps as you like. Yeah. So the way I changed the Upwise website was by, I added 2 different CSS files, starting with the fluid type CSS file. And you can see here I have my modular scale at the top, and I have my steps labeled. And I didn't change anything with the layout. All I did was kind of reset values. I went into, okay, I see, thank you. I'm going to drop this code. I think I do just have 1 minute left. Is it? Okay. I'm going to drop a link to this code. You can explore this, but check out Utopia. They will walk you through the process. Let's see. I think there'll also be a link about like how you can. This also has the added benefit of like leaving the grid behind. But in summary, lean into modular scales, reusable sets of harmonious CSS variables that just go together, and lean away from guesswork and randomness, making up numbers along the way. Yeah, logically related measurements make type and spatial elements feel related and cohere, as opposed to arbitrary measurements make type and spatial elements feel unrelated or wonky. They talk about content-driven development in the Gridless website that I'll drop a link to. You can see you're saving yourself a lot of different instructions. Flexible units, relative units, auto, things like that will have your website do the work for you. I guess I should show you it in action before I sign off here. This is the right one. Okay. And so I didn't do any breakpoints. There's no grids here. There's no. This is all just using those variables in my CSS. And yeah, it does it for me, right? I didn't have to use any Bootstrap. All I did was like use these variables, these steps in my scale to define everything, and they just look nice. All right. Awesome, thank you.